What's happening, everybody? It's Sean with Reactions to the Classics, and today we've got a reaction to the band America, their top 10 series, but top 12 songs brought to us by a friend, longtime supporter, and patron of the channel, Joseph. Thank you, Joseph. Appreciate you. Appreciate all the patrons who make this thing go. If you'd like to support us in any way, check out the Patreon link below or the patron link on the end screen. Joseph knows a ton about music, obviously knows a ton about America, a ton more than this guy does. So here's what Joseph has to say. Not your typical JSB list here, but there are some bands who have a basic set of songs that are their must for any concert. Journey have long referred to their Dirty Dozen, so I've appropriated that term for America. If anyone sees them in concert, and that's an experience I recommend having at least once, you can be guaranteed that these songs will be in the set. Now, before we move on to a potted history of the band, let's start with a quick trivia question. Asia, America, Europe. Which of these three bands were not formed in London? That's right. It was, of course, Europe. They're also the answer to which of those bands had a UK #1 single, incidentally. Do not remind me of the Final Countdown ever again, JSB. But that's the first interesting thing about the band America. Its members Dewey Bunnell, Jerry Beckley, and Dan Peek were all sons of U.S. Air Force servicemen who met when their parents were based near London and attended London Central High School. Peek was a couple of years older and the only one to be 100% American. Bunnell and Beckley both had English mothers. In fact, Bunnell was actually born in Yorkshire. Though initially playing covers, they quickly began performing original material. All three wrote, sang, lead, and harmony vocals and played guitar, with Peek and Beckley being multi-instrumentalists, equally adept on guitar, bass, and piano. Each member brought their own style to the group. The band's website gives us a good breakdown as anywhere, referring to Beckley's melodic pop rock, Bunnell's slinkily Latin-leaning rhythms and impressionistic lyric imagery, and Peek's more traditional country rock leanings and highly personal lyrics. I'll say it now that of the three, I have a firm favorite and an equally firm least favorite, but in honor of their famous horse, I ain't gonna give any names. Regular gigging led to attention from producer Ian Samwell and DJ Jeff Dexter, who became the band's managers and scored them a record deal, as well as co-producing their first album with the band, which was released in 1971. It's worth pointing out that at this point, Peek was 21, Bunnell, and Beckley were still just 19. That's crazy, man. Their signature song, Bunnell's A Horse With No Name, was released soon after as a non-album single, hitting #3 in the UK, though this would prove their only major success in their adopted homeland. Both the single and debut album, with the single added to the running order, would soon top the US charts. The follow-up release, Beckley's I Need You, also made the top 10. This success, and a craving for better weather than the UK could offer, led the trio permanently relocating to California in time for their second effort. The self-produced and aptly titled Homecoming. This would start a trend of album titles beginning with an H. Again, both the album and lead single Ventura Highway were US top 10 singles. 1973 began with them beating out the likes of Loggins and Messina, Harry Chapin, and Eagles to be named Best New Artist at the Grammys. Wow. But later in the year, third album Hat Trick, again a self-produced effort, broke the initial hot streak, stalling at #28 and failing to yield a major single. I mean, it was so competitive at that time. Electing to bring in a producer for their next album, the band were able to secure the services of none other than George Martin, which I did not know before reading this research, with whom they would work for the remainder of the 70s. In so doing, becoming the band he worked with more than any other besides them lads from Liverpool. This collaboration sparked another series of hits. The first three Martin-produced singles, one for each member, Bunnell's 10 Man, Peek's Lonely People, and Beckley's Sister Golden Hair, were all US top 5 hits, as were parent albums Holiday and Hearts, along with their greatest hits set History, released in 1975, for which, and this is important because you're going to see this on Spotify, for which Martin remixed the tracks from the first three albums. One of the reasons the internet is littered with confused YouTube comments telling reactors that he produced Horse With No Name and Ventura Highway. No, he really didn't, just to be clear. Really doesn't help that Spotify credit those 7 tunes to America, and they do when I built this playlist. George Martin, even though, wait for it, the remix versions aren't on Spotify, so they don't even have his versions that he did. Unfortunately, History proved to be aptly named, as that's what the band became in short order, as the soft rock that they specialized in was swept off the charts by disco. 1976's Hideaway, released a mere 5 months after History, fared fairly well, reaching #11 in gold status and yielding one further hit single, Peak Today's The Day. But 1977's Harbor, while reaching a still respectable 21, failed to land a single in the Hot 100 at all. Soon after the album's release, Peek left the band. Bunnell and Beckley continued as a duo. A move to Capitol Records failed to reverse their commercial decline, but they would have finally staged a comeback in 1982 with You Can Do Magic, restoring them to the top 10. Two more modestly successful singles followed, but the comeback was short-lived, and by 1985, they've been dropped by Capitol and essentially retired to the oldies circuit. Though they regularly joke in concert, we're not an oldies band, we're classic rock. And no, we don't know what the difference is either. With only sporadic album releases since then, Beckley remains the driving force behind new projects. Tired of battling Bunnell's reluctance to record, has largely focused his recording energies on a solo career and outside collaborations, including a fine trio effort with Carl Wilson and Chicago's Robert Lamb, sadly only completed after Wilson's death. In the meantime, Peake had continued to record as a contemporary Christian artist until his death in 2011. To the list itself, and I'm going to do the opposite of what they do in concert and start with the two biggest hits, primarily because I know you know one of them. I suspect it's the only tune on this list you'll recognize, but time will tell. Maybe not. So while this isn't a ranked list as such, remember that, okay? Suffice to say that my personal favorites are saved for the final third. As I alluded to at the start, it's very rare for me to present essentially a greatest hits list. But this is a nice primer. Deep cuts, and there are loads of great ones, can always follow later. All right, the music will not be in this video, but it will be at a Vimeo link below, so click on that and follow along. And no surprise, A Horse with No Name, remember a non-album single included later on America in 1971. Dewey's explanation of the song's origins. At first, I called it Desert Song. I'd spent time in the States with my family traveling in the desert, in New Mexico and in Southern California. I'd always been drawn to the desert. My brother and I had spent a lot of our time with the family exploring the wilderness of whatever state we lived in. We lived in Mississippi, Florida, Nebraska, Massachusetts, and California, and we loved animals and fishing. We were always outdoors. When I got to England in 1967 with my family, it was a rainy place. There wasn't a lot of wilderness like there is in the U.S., so I wanted to write a song about the desert, and I called it Desert Song. In the chorus were the words, A Horse with No Name, and I'd use that as sort of a vehicle to get out into the desert. Then it was our manager, Ian Samwell, who co-produced the album. He was the one who suggested, oh, you must use the line Horse with No Name as the title. It's a much more gripping title, and I said, sure. I didn't even flinch on that one. Asked recently if he'd been surprised at the time that Horse was the song the label latched onto as a single. He said, yeah, I think so. I thought it was at best kind of a quirky song. I mean, my mother loved it, so that was a good endorsement. Mom likes it. Many years later, the song would be introduced to a new generation, but via a route Dewey was initially reluctant to pursue. As Beckley explains, A Horse with No Name was in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, and when that deal came up, Dewey was quite concerned there's quite a lot of violence. Yeah, that's an understatement, right? There was this whole issue of whether you would be encouraging kids this kind of behavior, and because of that, he was on the fence about it. At the time, my son Joe, who was only about 10, and said, are you out of your mind? That's going to be the biggest game of the decade. So we talked Dewey into it. Now we have people who come up to us, and they're usually guys, telling us that Grand Theft Auto San Andreas was our first exposure to our music. It's odd, but great at the same time. I run it all the time with Rock Band and Guitar Hero. People know songs from that. So different world we live in nowadays. I'm going to have the lyrics up as always. Thanks again, Joseph. All right, A Horse with No Name. Obviously, I knew that song well. The most striking thing on this song for me is how much he sounds like Neil Young, right? I mean, I wonder back then if people were like, is this Neil Young? Just really, really well done, obviously. All of it. This is a production of it. And no, it's not George Martin, even though what it says down below. Just the la, 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 the acoustic, just the way it's mixed in there. The kind of dramatic change up in tempo. Just obviously a really well done song. Now, there's two other songs that I'm pretty sure I know on here. This isn't one of them. We got Sister Golden Hair. From Hearts in 1975, Jerry says, this song had been hanging around for a bit. I had originally written this for the Holiday album, which was the first record we made with George Martin. I didn't dislike the song, obviously. I wrote it and I liked it, but the songs I picked for Holiday were a little more piano-oriented. So this one stayed in the pile until we cut Hearts. George Martin produced it and Jeff Emmerich engineered, but the arrangement was mine, and we liked the idea of holding off the drums at first. When producing a song, every instrument doesn't have to come in on the downbeat. There's such a common production language that says if you hold the bass off until the second verse, it just adds another layer. In Sister Golden Hair, we have that famous drum fill where the drums enter on the second verse after I sing, I do believe there's times when a woman sure can be a friend of mine. When we do that live, the whole audience air drums that. It's because it's just part of the build of that tune. So I think we did it right with that one. Okay, Sister Golden Hair. So I do know the song. I don't know it greatly. I know that guitar riff that it starts out with, and I know a little bit of the chorus. I don't know it greatly, so I must have just heard it played, when I was a little kid. I mean, I probably don't remember it quite from there, but maybe a couple years later being played. So I don't know it super well, but I had no idea that was American. Basically, the story is this guy, he's kind of running from this relationship, right? It starts out, it's Sunday, but he's going to get back in bed, basically, and look forward to Monday, but he's telling her, I'm sorry. that I haven't been present and have been hard to communicate. Will you kind of meet me in the middle? I realize I need this relationship. I just haven't been engaged. So a really good tune. Next up from the Holiday album in 1974, we got Lonely People. After Peake's departure, the remaining duo initially didn't perform any of his songs in concert. But by the late 80s, his biggest few inevitably made their way back into the set due to fan demand. When performed live, Bunnell now takes the lead vocal, but Beckley is the MVP, covering backing vocals, harmonica, and piano. Wow. Okay, Lonely People. I also knew that song. I mean, not greatly, right? But I did know it, a little bit of it. Really good song, and basically just telling them, don't give up until you die. Don't give up until you drink from the silver cup and ride that highway up in the sky. Then after that line, it's, never know until you try in the second verse. So yeah, and never take you down or never give you up. You never know until you try how it finishes. So an encouraging song, but great melodies. I mean, all the way around here, the instrumentation's been fantastic on these first three songs, and the harmonies are great. Next up, we have from the America album in 1971, I Need You. Jerry says it's one of the first songs that I had written. It wasn't the first song, but it was very early on. One of the things I like to mention about I Need You, was that early on we met Harry Nilsson in London. Harry was a friend of Derek Taylor, the publicist for the Beatles, who was a mentor to us, and Harry was going to record I Need You as his follow-up single to his hit Without You. At the time, we had no plans for it. Our single was Horse, and everybody was excited about promoting it. Then, of course, we ended up using I Need You as the follow-up single. Many years later, Harry did record the song. All right, guys, I went back and watched a interview with Dewey Bunnell. Heard him say his name, so apologies for getting that wrong, but I'm not going to go back and reshoot it. It's just one of those things. But Dewey Bunnell, I got it now, America fans, so don't come after me. This song, nice harmonies and stuff. I actually don't like the earlier stuff so far as much as I like the later stuff, but she left him, and he needs her, and he's heartbroken, and that's all you need to know, right? We're going to stay with this album. Go to the track Sandman from America in 1971. Joseph says, and by the way, this is all Joseph's research. All of this is, none of it's mine. The one track on this list that wasn't a charting single, however, is the B-side of A Horse with No Name. It gained notice. It was also included in edited form on History. So it stands with their most well-known tracks. As a matter of fact, this is also the song that effectively introduced me to America. A Sunday night radio show that had a celebrity guest making requests, and on one occasion, circa 1991, the guest asked for Sandman, noting that it was Horse's B-side. The moment at which I realized Horse wasn't a Neil Young song. Okay, so I forgot this was in here, so Joseph thought that too. Shortly after, I found a vinyl copy of History at my primary school's annual fundraising gala, along with Harry Chapin's Greatest Stories Live. Just what all the 11-year-olds were into that year, right? Okay, and proceeded to play it daily for a good few months. A rousing number that has taken on a life of its own on stage. A recent review said, if you close your eyes, you'd easily imagine the Foo Fighters had come on stage. Strangely enough, the song has its roots in the Bee Gees track New York Mining Disaster 1941, a number the group played in their cover band days. As Beckley explained in 2019, Sandman actually came out of strumming Mining Disaster. It's an A minor strum as the backdrop while singing in the event of something happening to me, which ultimately led to our Ain't It Foggy Outside. The lyric to Sandman is a very deep story with Vietnam soldiers and their return, but the structure came from the Gibbs. All right, Sandman, supposedly having some military connotations, even that word I won't get into. It's supposed to be a squadron in a certain area. I was reading in the notes on this song, but obviously growing up, as Air Force kids, that would make sense. And, Vietnam War and allusions to that. I thought the biggest example of their master instrumentation and musicianship, along with the harmonies, just a fantastic, powerful song. All right, next up from the Hearts album in 1975, we have Woman Tonight. The third and final single from Hearts was only a modest hit, reaching 44, but again was featured on History as the closer, no less. Another Dan Peake tune and another outlier in the catalog, both in genre and that all three members share lead vocals, despite there not being that many vocals to go around. Despite being a bigger hit, Dan's Today's the Day is not one that's ever returned to the set list. His other top 40 writing credit, Don't Cross the River, is there, but is missing here because Dirty Dozen sounded better than Lucky 13. So the rest of this list will be solely Jerry and Dewey tunes. Well, almost. All right, Woman Tonight, just saying how much he likes her and how much, if she's holding him, does he feel happy? This was the first miss for me. I didn't really like anything about it. Their vocal, they sound good, but I didn't like the arrangement of it. It just wasn't for me. But hey, man, one miss out of the first six is it's a pretty good percentage. As we kick off the second half of the Dirty Dozen, we have You Can Do Magic from View from the Ground in 1982. Joseph says we briefly move into the 80s for the comeback single, sung by Jerry, but their only major hit to come from an outside source, being written and produced for them by Russ Ballard. Most of the album saw Beckley and Bunnell self-producing for the first time since 1973. As Beckley explained, we came out of the George Martin years, as the sales started to taper, with the usual label involvement of a million different ideas and a million different approaches. And that got a little bit out of focus. And with each given year, there was a new A&R guy. But come View from the Ground, we basically said, we're going to do the bulk of this album, and you can pick a couple of producers for additional material. Along with the 2 Russ Ballard tunes, there were 2 cuts produced by Bobby Colomby, including Right Before Your Eyes, which would become the next single and reach 45. I do know this song. You Can Do Magic takes me back to Omaha, Nebraska when I was 10 or 11 years old. The song is so well produced, which I think is a good point to make since they're basically in there doing most of it. So, their harmonies are fantastic. The arrangement and the instrumentation is right on to make the You Can Do Magic stick into your head. So, another one that I knew and super enjoyed, which I probably didn't enjoy when I was 10 years old, to be honest. Not everybody's as refined, as a 10 or 11-year-old as our man Joseph. So some of us have work to do. Next up, we have The Border from the album From Your Move in 1983. Joseph says, let's stay in the 80s just a little longer as we reach the group's final top 40 entry, this time from a full album solely produced and largely written by Ballard. As in Beckley's words, because View from the Ground included You Can Do Magic, which Russ wrote and produced, and the infinite wisdom of the label, if a little's good, a lot's better. So they sent us over to England to do a whole album in that fashion. And the way Russ works is he plays every note. So we just came in as, although we included some of our own writing, he did the tracks and we were basically just singers. Indeed, 6 of Your Moves tracks were solely written by Ballard, and this would have been a 7th, except that Bunnell wasn't satisfied with the lyrics. As he explains it, Russ had written a song called The Border, and the song itself is virtually what you hear today, except that I rewrote all the lyrics except for the title line. Because he was very British, he had used some cliche lyrics that to us as Americans sounded incongruous. He was trying to get a Desperado-type feel, but used words like Pasadena. The lyrics just didn't get the whole border thing and that Mexicali feel that he was envisioning. I asked to rewrite it, and he was receptive, so I wrote a story about running away and trying to escape something. The track also stands out on the album, which as a whole is a bland mess, Joseph says, and best avoided, as it features input from the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra on strings and Raphael Ravenscroft of Baker Street fame on sax. The Border, maybe I've heard that song a couple times in my life back in the 80s. I don't know, man. Get the do-do-do, like it's a kind of a recurring theme, some of the vocal inflections that they make, and I think that's why I think I might know this song, but I don't know. This probably has a 1983 sound to it, which it has to. If you can make it to the border, if you can make it to the coast, if I can make it to the border, I'll be in the arms of the girl I love the most. Do-do-do-do-do, make it to them. That's kind of reminiscent of their style, even though they got a little bit of 80s arrangement on it. Except from the Homecoming album in 1972, we're down a way back, boys and girls. We got Only in Your Heart, the 3rd single from my favorite America album by some distance, Joseph says, but the lowest charting single to appear on this list with a chart peak of 62. Nonetheless, it's another longtime live staple, especially after its inclusion on History, where it worked as on its parent album as the closer to side 1. The story behind the false ending is freely available on Songfacts, but as cool as it is, I wonder if it may have limited radio play. Radio hates songs with stops in them. Can't have a second of silence. People will switch to another station. That's true, and I think they still think that. Of course, as with Woman Tonight, having 3 charting singles from one album was a rarity in itself in those days because they were always pushing them to bring out the next album, right? We got to have an album a year, if not more. So when I first saw the group in Auckland in the early 2000s, they had just had a more extensive compilation album. The Definitive America reached number 2 in the New Zealand charts. And when introducing the song, Jerry introduced it as, quote, another one from the Oh Yeah, I Forgot They Did That One album, which is typical of their self-deprecating nature and a sign of the British influence, I'm sure. That's what he says. You're probably actually right about that. All right, Mary, have you seen Better Days? Only in Your Heart. So Mary's heartbroken over this guy, but our protagonist singing here is telling her, hey, look, I'm going to be there for you if you need me. And he just keeps asking her, Mary, have you seen Better Days? Like that's how the whole ending of the song goes, probably 15 times. But thought it had a good sound to it. 1972 for sure. Next up from the Holiday album in 1974, we have Tin Man. While Beckley had been quoted as saying that there's a lot more to the song beyond the obvious Wizard of Oz connection, Bunnell, the song's writer, feels no need to downplay it. That's still my favorite movie of all time. It embedded itself in my psyche as a young kid, and I just can't ever shake that. It was an inspiring film, and of course it had all the messages that we all have our brain and our heart and our courage if we look inside. It's a beautifully made film, and I love the film's fantastic transition from black and white to color. Life can be that way. It's either black and white, and you can turn it into color if you work in that direction. Tin Man was really the first song we did with George Martin, so it had a special place in our history. Also, George played the key piano hook on that song. I know it was almost 50 years ago, but I still can't fathom the decision of Warner's, this is Joseph talking, UK, to relegate this to the B-side of Mad Dog, a song I consider the stinker from the Holiday album, but there we are. All right, Tin Man, a song that I actually did know. I don't know it real well, but I have heard it before. And the idea of this is that Oz didn't make the Tin Man how he is. He was already that way, right? And kind of a little commentary on kind of you kind of are who you are. It's not that other things can make you that way. Just a great vibe on the song. I just like the atmosphere of it. The way he sings the Tin Man on the chorus. Like I know that part of it. And Joseph says we end with 2 tracks in a pairing that could be titled America's Songs Janet Jackson Ripped Off. I'm not a big Janet Jackson fan, so you're not getting any pushback from me. We have Daisy Jane from Hearts in 1975. Jerry says the song starts with flying me back to Memphis, gotta find my Daisy Jane. That's all poetic license. I didn't know a Daisy Jane, and I'd never been to Memphis when I wrote the song. If anything, I was pulling from Nick Drake. He did 3 albums that are masterpieces. On one of them, Brighter Later, there's this song called Hazy Jane. So I started playing around with Daisy Chain, and that became Daisy Jane. I wrote it on a Yamaha upright piano in a little cottage in the south of England. I kind of spoke the words when I made a demo of it. I remember playing it for Eric Carmen, and he asked, "What are you going to do there in the middle?" I kind of left a little space open. I shrugged and said, "I don't know. George will do something." I was being a little cocky at the time, thinking, okay, I'll turn it over to the legendary George Martin. And of course, George wrote a lovely viola part that's a signature part of the tune. We're very grateful to him for that. Daisy Jane, I don't know that he really even knows much about Daisy Jane. I don't think they had a great relationship. That's what I'm taking from this. He's going to got to find her again. And now he's finally sane, but he thinks it's her fault maybe that he went insane, I think. But a really good vocal tone there. I thought it was a really good song. It's the piano part in the beginning that Janet Jackson lifted. I could hear it the second it came on. The viola part in there was fantastic as well. All right, we got 1 song left. Now remember, these aren't in order, but Joseph did say the final third of this list is his favorite. We have Ventura Highway from the Homecoming album in 1972. Joseph says we come full circle, ending with another Buñuel tune that sprung out of memories of childhood in sunny California while being in the somewhat less sunny climes of England. As a family, we were stationed at Vandenberg Air Force Base in Central California. He said there were a lot of beaches near there, and our family would drive down to LA a lot. One time when we were driving on the highway, my dad had a flat tire. We were right there by the beach, and we hung out while my dad changed the tire. And we were under the freeway sign that said Ventura. Later on, I was back in England. I remembered how much I loved that California coastline and basically the sun and surf. In my mind, I could see that sign, Ventura, and I put together some chords. Then I hummed a melody line over the top, and so that's the way Ventura Highway worked. Now, don't confuse that with that Ventura Boulevard from Mr. Tom Petty in Free Fallin'. All right, Ventura Highway. They really like their vocal inflections, don't they? This when we got the did it, and then do at on the outro, on the ending of each one of those kind of a little call and response. A really good song. I like the harmonies on it. I just thought that the tone of it vocally was fantastic. So I really did like that as a finisher, and he's just telling this girl how great Ventura Highway is, basically. All right, now we're going to come to my favorite tracks. So, this is a Dirty Dozen, so there's 12 songs on here. I've got a lot of honorable mentions. We're going to go honorable mentions: Lonely People, I Need You, You Can Do Magic, Tin Man, and Daisy Jane. My faves are going to be Sister Golden Hair, Sandman, and this last track, Ventura Highway. Yes, A Horse With No Name is not on here. I mean, it's a good song. I just don't really like it that much. And so I just kind of always based my opinion on America on that song, because I didn't even know they sang these other songs that I actually knew. So I just kind of based my opinion on that, like, they're fine, but I don't really care to dive any deeper. But this list showed me that they had a lot of great stuff. So Joseph always does a fantastic job, but thank you to him for putting this together. What else would you have on the America Dirty Dozen? Now remember, putting these lists together is extremely difficult, cultivating these catalogs and putting them together. So be respectful to my man, JSB, but let me know what you thought below. Give me those suggestions. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I will see you.